CBS Radio presents the news. From Washington, here is Bob Pierpoint.
Another larger Sputnik with a dog named Curly aboard is now whirling around the Earth 1,000 miles out in space. The Russians launched an 1,100-pound satellite late last night, and so far both Sputnik 2 and its K-9 passenger are reported doing well.
The dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take.
Radio Moscow started broadcasting time schedules for its latest satellite a short while ago, with the announcement that Sputnik 2 will pass over Washington, D.C. in just a few minutes from now. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, well-known associate director of the Smithsonian Observatory at Cambridge, Massachusetts, was asked if the half-ton weight of Sputnik 2 indicated the Russians might have a war rocket powerful enough to reach this continent from the Soviet Union. It certainly indicates they have the capabilities of launching an intercontinental ballistic missile, replied Dr. Hynek.
Now it is time to take longer strides. Time for a great new American enterprise. Time for this nation to take a clearly leading role in space achievement, which in many ways may hold the key to our future on Earth.
Dr. John S. Reinhardt, also with the Smithsonian Observatory, commented after studying figures on the new Soviet satellite, "I firmly believe the Russians could reach the moon in a few days."
I believe we should go to the moon, but I think every citizen of this country, as well as the members of the Congress, should consider the matter carefully. Every scientist, every engineer, every serviceman, every technician, contractor, and civil servant gives his personal pledge that this nation will move forward with the full speed of freedom in the exciting adventure of space. We go into space because whatever mankind must undertake, free men must fully share.
On January 25, 1994, the Deep Space Program science experiment known as Clementine was launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base. Clementine was able to deliver more than 1.8 million digital images between February 26 and April 22, 1994. These images were quickly accessible to the general public on the World Wide Web. In 1994, President Clinton cited the Clementine mission as one of the major national achievements in aeronautics in space.
By going to the Clementine Lunar Image Browser 1.5, you can find many images that have been smudged or blurred to keep you from seeing what is there. Click on the desired resolution section and choose 1 pixel equals 1 kilometer option. Then by going to the image size in pixels option, choose 768 by 768. You are now ready to see for yourself a huge object on the surface of the moon. On the moon map, you will easily see a dot on the top of this crater and on the lower left. Click on the black dot on top of the crater and a close-up image of this section appears in the browser. What you see is a huge object resting at the top of this crater. It appears to be a large machine or perhaps a large spaceship or a motor of some kind. You can clearly see this photograph has been smudged over and blurred so we cannot see the details. This little gem was discovered and brought to the attention of moon researchers all over the world by Joseph P. Skipper on May 28, 2004. I decided to hire an imaging forensics expert to take this photo and to try and remove the blurring to reveal what is underneath. Jim Horrocks, an imaging forensics expert, who has worked with the Los Angeles Police Department, was sent this photo, and his findings were written in a report he submitted to the production. First of all, the astounding measurements he made reveal an object that is 10 times the size of Los Angeles. 10 times the size. This in itself is an incredible detail about the size of this object. By using Adobe Photoshop and some of the filters available within the program, we were able to see more of the details that were lost due to the blurring applied by whoever did this for NASA and the Clementine mission archives. This enormous object seems to be some form of a machine or possibly a spacecraft. In all the enhancements made independently, it appears there may have been what appears to be a giant humanoid wearing a jumpsuit and possibly working on the front portion of this contraption. This may or may not be a giant humanoid. Perhaps the shadows seem to reflect something of a human form. We will never know until NASA releases this photograph unblurred and with the clarity available for us to see. By clicking on the new lunar map now available, you will now see that the same crater is available for viewing in all its clarity. There is no object there anymore, and there is no smudging of anything near or within the crater. We have to ask ourselves, if there is nothing on the moon that suggests alien moon bases, strange structures, machines, and possible civilizations thriving there, then why has there been a deliberate tampering of these and thousands of images we will present here in this film? One of the many challenges I had to deal with in making this film was how the structures on the moon were to be presented. Unfortunately, most of all the Apollo and orbiter photos are black and white. Many photos are in low resolution, so zooming into them for a closer look causes the photos to blur and become pixelated, making it impossible to see details of what's on the surface. While I was designing a poster for the film in Photoshop, I decided that I did not want a black and white photo in the background of the poster. So I decided to color the background image I was using so I would have a full color poster for the film. I took some full color aerial photos of landscapes that closely resemble the distances of the moon's surface, turned them into black and white photos, and compared them to the moon photo I was about to airbrush. Noticing the different shades of the aerials from Earth and the colors represented, I then started making a color palette in Photoshop. All I did was airbrush the colors onto the moon photo as they appeared on Earth. But the structures and other objects on the moon revealed themselves. I was so overwhelmed at the results, I have now colorized over 247 photos. Now that I had come up with a format and a routine for colorizing the moon, I decided to gather the most famous Apollo moon anomaly photos that researchers from all over the world had been presenting for years and decided to colorize them. This is one of the many original NASA photos that has some very unique anomalies, especially here in this area. This is what it looks like after we bring up the contrast to eliminate the brightness applied to distort the image. And this is what it looks like after applying my colorizing process to it. So remember, these are colors and tones I used from Earth photography applied to the moon's surface. With Earth colors applied, you can see all the details with depth perception as never before.
By painting the moon with Earth colors and tones, we can now see what has been there all along for us to view.
I got started in this probably in the mid-1990s, listening to Hoagland on the old Coast to Coast AM radio program with Art Bell, and he was talking about the stuff that he'd found on the moon, and some images and some things that clearly appeared to be structures. They were very anomalous, and he was noting that there were thousands upon thousands of photographs that had been taken of the moon by the various unmanned probes and then the astronauts that had orbited the moon. And he said, you know, Art, anybody can do this. And what I realized is, A, I'm anybody. B, I think I understand the arguments. I'm an engineer by trade, so aerospace engineer, so I may not be an architect, but I certainly know structure when I see it. And I started looking at the evidence that he presented, and I just got fascinated by it. I created a web page called the Lunar Anomalies homepage, which still exists, and it was all dedicated to stuff on the moon.
The Hubble telescope has taken the most incredible photography of deep space and far off in the vast universe. When you see these spectacular scenes, you can't help but wonder how many others live out there. So when NASA was asked by scientists and astronomers when the Hubble telescope would be used in photographing the moon, NASA's reply was that because the moon was too bright, it would be impossible to get accurate photography of the moon. The first photo was released from the Hubble Space Telescope in 1999. Needless to say, the scientists and astronomers were not too pleased at how NASA had deliberately lied to them. When I heard about this photograph, I thought for sure we would see the moon in full color. But of all the photos taken by the Hubble telescope of the moon, they are in black and white. After colorizing all these photos, you can't help but learn the moon's layout. After all, it is a small planet compared to Earth.
Prepare yourself for an incredible expedition as we now take you back to the moon on a voyage filled with mystery and secrecy.
I'm not sure why NASA has not told us what's on the moon. In a way they have told us, because the pictures are there and there's hundreds of them. So anybody can do what I did and go and look at the pictures and enlarge them and see what there is.
NASA has been there, but we haven't been back since 1972, and you kind of sit there and wonder why that is. It's our closest celestial neighbor in the heavens. You can see it every night when you walk outside, and really there's so much mystery about it still to this day. Many people seem to think that the Apollo program answered a lot of these questions, and in many ways it did, but we, the general public, have never been privy to any of those answers.
Is there already somebody there? And is there even a secret space program that we don't know about, that maybe even NASA doesn't know about, that's been to the moon and back and using very advanced technology?
A cover story that's based entirely upon the premise that there is absolutely no life there, and that there's no life to be found, past, present, at all. That's simply not the case.
So I certainly believe that some of the stuff that we're finding on the moon may be alien, extraterrestrial in origin. It may be ruined, ancient, abandoned extraterrestrial ruins. Some of it may be active, and some of it, in fact, may be our own stuff.
I don't think there's any possibility that NASA is not aware of the civilizations on the moon and the structures. They're very obvious, easy to see.
They are in contact with some of these extraterrestrial life forms, and they don't want you to know about it.
There was the guy that hacked into the NASA database and found some listings of non-terrestrial officers.
NASA may have made a deal with beings up there to not reveal their civilization, but then again, the pictures have the evidence. It's all in the pictures anyway.
The whole purpose to the cover-up is to prevent we, the plebeian masses of this planet, from gaining the appreciation that there is indeed extraterrestrial life out there, intelligent extraterrestrial life. And this is life that the government is very well aware of. The governments around the world, it's certainly not a U.S. issue. They're very well aware of it.
Because you've been lied to, you've been robbed of something that you deserve, which is to know what your true history is and what your true significance is in this world.
I really don't think people realize how deep the lie goes, how big it is, how unbelievable the cover-up is. This truly is the greatest story ever denied. It is the most amazing secret never told. It is the most monumental cover-up in human history. And hopefully, the public will take a movie like this and will begin to open up some doors, begin to open up some windows to the truth, whether it's from the government, whether it's from other insiders who can now come forward and begin to tell their stories of what they did and their involvement in this cover-up to get the truth out there. I think the world's ready for it, And hopefully a movie like this will push that forward a little bit and speed the process up.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know.
By playing around with these images, using modern software techniques, some of the results really are eye-opening. And again, it really comes back to, you've got to ask yourself the question, why do NASA or any of the other space agencies or any of the major observatories, why will they not show you any of the new adaptive optics imagery of the moon? They simply won't show it to you. They don't have any, they claim.
A report was prepared under contract to NASA by the Brookings Institute, Washington, D.C. The report outlines the need to investigate the possible social consequences of an extraterrestrial discovery and to consider whether such a discovery should be kept from the public in order to avoid political change and a possible devastating effect on scientists themselves due to the discovery that many of their own most cherished theories could be at risk.
And it says in there that you should seriously consider covering that information up, because it may in fact lead to what it calls the disintegration of our culture because of the tremendous cultural impact, the shock that it would have, especially to scientists and engineers who've come to believe arrogantly, I think, that we are the top of the heap, that we are some part of some natural process and we are the dominant species. I don't think that that argument flies. I think that document is nothing more than their political and legal cover for what they've been doing, because there is a much bigger issue that comes out here. What most people don't know is that, NASA is not a civilian science agency. If you look at the actual charter under which NASA was originally put into existence, it states clearly there that NASA is an adjunct, a division of the Department of Defense, and it is beholden to the Department of Defense.
When you couple the Brookings Institute report with a document called Executive Order 10501, 10501 was a document that was specifically related to safeguarding official information in the interests of national defense. And it's important to note that the term national defense actually includes not only considerations of a military perspective, but also geoeconomic and geopolitical as well. And when you compare or take those two documents, when you take 10501 and the Brookings Institute report, right there, that lays the framework for the greatest story ever denied. That gives them legal justification to cover this up.
Switching now to the voice of Jim Lovell. by 60.5. Good to hear your voice. Apollo 8, Houston, what does the old moon look like from 60 miles? Over.
Okay, Houston. The moon is essentially gray. No color. Looks like plaster of Paris.
It has been speculated the moon missions were hoaxed. Perhaps some of the Apollo missions were filmed in different locations and in studios in order to conceal the incredible discoveries found on the moon. In 1979, Marie Chatelain, former chief of NASA Communications Systems, confirmed Neil Armstrong had indeed reported seeing 2 UFOs on the rim of a crater. The encounter was common knowledge at NASA, he revealed, but nobody has talked about it until now.
Even if you don't care what's up there, you damn sure care about the lies that are being put in place to hide what's up there. You know, whether you have the interest in the space program or the interest in what's going on over our planet's atmosphere or not, you are affected by the lies that are in place to maintain this greatest of all cover-ups. And we're talking about just a massive effort by the military-industrial complex.
A couple of nuclear weapons sent into space were destroyed by the extraterrestrials. Our government sent a nuclear weapon for explosion on the moon's surface. It was tended to, as I understand it, to assess some scientific data and reaction and so forth.
When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries in 1974 through 77, I met the late Dr. Werner von Braun in early 74. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played, that game being the effort to weaponize space.
The idea of any explosion in space by any Earth government was not acceptable to the extraterrestrials, and that has been demonstrated over and over.
The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in 74, they were the enemy.
They wanted a weapon system they could put in space that would stop a ballistic missile. That was the concept.
Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism.
Now, if that ballistic missile happened to be coming from another direction other than earthbound, could it do the same thing?
Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern.
I have but a short time to try to convince people that we are moving in an avenue where we are going to militarize space.
The next enemy was asteroids. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card.
As a direct result, we will become a threat to them unless we spiritually grow also.
And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie.
We put nuclear weapons out in space as a line of defense, and we was ready to blow them up if they started in.
Today, most people have come to the very clear realization, I think, that things aren't quite as you've been told, and the question then just becomes is, how big is the lie? And the truth is, it's bigger than most people can imagine. One of the great things about the NASA archive system is that at the back of many of their documents, they have both distribution and reference lists. And the distribution lists are very important. They say who that document is being forwarded to and which department and for what company. And when you begin to cull through these documents, certainly ones that deal with specific subject matter, like image enhancement, for example, you begin to see a lot of names that obviously begin to repeat. And you can very quickly determine what individuals knew what and had to have been privy to certain information just by the very nature of their job. The individual that I managed to identify and who agreed to meet with me and talk with me was a man who worked for a company called Belcom during the 1960s and into the early 1970s. Belcom, although many people haven't heard of it, is in many ways a company that is more responsible for landing man on the moon than NASA really was. Belcom's a division of AT&T and Western Electric. Belcom was around for only a decade. They were there for the specific purpose of landing man on the moon and ensuring that NASA got the job done. Meeting him was actually the most incredible 3 hours of my life, the interview that we had. A man who I knew was in the know, a man who I'd tracked down. He wasn't in any way looking to throw this stuff out in the public eye. It was just really a matter of him recognizing that I wasn't on a total blind fishing expedition, and I'd actually figured some things out. That opened him up in a big way. He'd made the comment several times during the interview that he'd never talked about this with anyone before. It was not the kind of subject matter that you talk with anyone about. The people that were in a position to be in the know, to have at least some high level of understanding of what was really going on, these individuals are also very well aware of what their government is actually capable of.
A guard told me that he was asked to burn some photographs and not to look at them. And there was another guard guarding him who was in green fatigues watching him burn the photographs. And he said he was too tempted. He looked at one and it was a picture of a UFO, and he was very descriptive. I can go into that later with anyone. He immediately was hit in the head and he had a big gash in his forehead. He was knocked out and he's terrified, so he would have to be protected. Another incident, I knew someone in quarantine with the Apollo astronauts. He told me that the Apollo astronauts saw craft on the moon when we landed, and that is what he told me. And he also was afraid. He said that the astronauts are told to keep this quiet. They're not allowed to talk about it. So I do want to let you know that I worked out there for a number of years, and I ran into this. So it's not something everyone knows that works out there for a long time. My boss didn't know about it. Some people that sat right next to me didn't know about it. It's very strange, because I don't know how they can do it, but they can let some people know about it and then others not. I'm willing to testify before Congress that what I'm saying is true, and thank you very much.
They know the power of these people. A lot of people ask questions like, well, how come none of these people who knew about it have ever come forward? These individuals have signed their lives away in security classification documents. And when I say sign their lives away, I mean that quite literally. I mean, these are things that if they talk about, it's off to Guantanamo Bay. This is the greatest secret in not only the United States military and the United States government, but around the world. So really, for a lot of these individuals, and there are many other investigators out there who will tell you this, that one of the only ways these individuals have to ever put the truth out is to do it through a proxy. They find another individual, or another individual finds them, and they talk a little bit about what they know. They're usually very, very careful when they talk about it, because they don't want trails leading right back to them. With this gentleman, I think a great deal of his openness had to do with the fact that he knew he was dying, and he knew that he was just fed up with the government's behavior. So he was more than willing, knowing that I had understood at least a little bit of what was going on, he was much more willing to open up to me.
On November 20th, 1969, the Apollo 12 astronauts did an experiment with some strange results. They crashed the lunar module ascent stage into the surface of the moon. Shockwaves reverberated throughout the moon for over an hour. Some have likened this to ringing like a bell. These results were repeated during the Apollo 13 mission. However, this time the shockwaves lasted for over 3 hours. Hollow moon researchers say that this is proof that the interior of the moon was hollowed out by artificial means. MIT's Dr. Sean C. Solomon wrote, "The lunar orbiter experiments vastly improved our knowledge of the moon's gravitational field, indicating the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow." On March 7, 1971, instruments placed on the moon by the Apollo astronauts recorded a cloud of water vapor passing over the surface. The event lasted for over 14 hours and covered an area of at least 100 square miles. The Earth is thought to be around 4.6 billion years old, while rocks from the Moon were found to be around 5.3 billion years old. And the dust the rocks were found in is thought to be about 1 billion years older than that. This information conflicts with the theory that the Moon was produced by a collision the Earth had with another body earlier in its history.
One of the things you've got to keep in mind as well when you're looking at NASA imagery is that although the sky may appear black in those frames, in many instances, when you enhance that image, you discover that there's actually an incredible amount of image detail that's just buried in the darkness of that image. But when you amplify that scene and you begin to see what's hidden there in the sky, you can begin to make out shapes. There's a few images that show structuring. And this is all done in an effort to both hide the truth, but as well to leave a bit of the truth there for you. And again, a lot of people don't want to believe they do that, but they do. That's all part of the dripping faucet technique, where they give you tiny little bits of the truth, and you can begin to fill it in, put it together for yourself. One of the frames that really demonstrates the way they use this dripping faucet technique is a frame known as 20680 from the Apollo 17 mission. For 30 years, this frame was officially listed in their catalogs in the Apollo 17 Photographic Index as being a blank, no image data frame, a frame that has got nothing on it. While this image is most definitely sunstruck and overexposed, blank it most certainly is not.
Harrison Schmitt, created some patches for his own mission, Apollo 17, which is again the mission that we take these images from, and that we've seen a lot of this color effect. And what he put on it was Stonehenge and the sun. And the sun is a symbol of ancient Egyptian god Horus. There's all sorts of Egyptian mythology that runs through all the Apollo program, which is supposed to be Greek, but it ends up that there's really sort of a dual meaning to all this stuff, and it's an Egyptian. And what he's clearly saying to people is, look, these are ruins. There is structure. This is what we're really doing on the moon. And I think what they're doing is they're trying in a subtle way to let people know, either because they remember it subconsciously or because they are deliberately trying to send us messages under the radar that they did not go there and pick up a bunch of rocks, but instead what they brought back, or what they were sent to investigate, was ancient extraterrestrial ruins.
One of the most important things to keep in mind whenever you're looking at any NASA imagery, whether it's Apollo imagery or imagery of Mars, it doesn't really matter. Perspective is everything. We human beings down here on terra firma are afforded one perspective of the moon. We look at it, and that's what we have to look at. We don't know what the moon looks like from the side or from different oblique angles. All we have is this singular representation that we have to look at. And NASA has in fact gone to great lengths to ensure that the imagery that they show us of the moon's surface resembles very closely, both in photometric function as well as in angling, and the dimensional properties of the image make it appear as if it would look just like it does from Earth. One of the primary obfuscation techniques that NASA uses is to simply rotate the imagery. They insert a false horizon in their oblique imagery, so by turning these images upside down, it alters vertical objects, suddenly don't cast shadows anymore. The shadows aren't in the right places. And this technique has been used since the dawn of the space age. Since the lunar orbiter missions, since even before that with Ranger missions, to make things appear as we humans expect them to appear, because we look through a telescope here, we say, oh, that's how it looks. So from the side, it probably looks like this. The reality is it doesn't. The moon is a very three-dimensional object.
Hasselblad cameras were the ones that were used by NASA to photograph everything on the moon. And the reason Hasselblad was used is because they had registration crosshairs. Now these registration crosshairs are there for a specific reason, okay? They're so that you can take a single photo with a single camera, so you'll be able to get distance from an object to another object because of the registration crosshairs that are built into the Hasselblad cameras. These crosshairs are always in front of whatever's being photographed. Okay, this is a perfect shot of a photograph of one of the astronauts on the moon. Now here you see the crosshairs from the Hasselblad camera. Okay? You can clearly see that they are even in the darkness of space. But you can clearly see that the crosshairs are there in exactly the positions they should be. So in a lot of the false horizons, they've eliminated the crosshairs into sky parts. And almost about 90% of the moon shots have what we call a false horizon.
In 1999, William Burroughs wrote a book called This New Ocean. It's a non-fictional account, supposedly non-fictional account, of the space race. If you look at the cover of that book, you'll notice that he has a picture of the Earth's horizon on it with the moon above. And on the cover of this book, there are two black running parallel lines that climb up from the Earth, and they pass the moon on either side, paralleling it. It's interesting when you go and look at the ISS and space shuttle imagery of the moon from low Earth orbit. When you begin to enhance those images and begin to attack the black area of the sky that appears to be solid black, and there are different filtering techniques you can use to draw that out, you begin to realize that those lines that are on the cover of this book actually are appearing in these photographs. And they don't appear once or twice. You don't see this effect once or twice. You see this in many, many, many dozens of photographs. They're just of the moon. They appear when you enhance the image. And obviously Burroughs knows something that the public's not privy to. He's really just a classic outsider-insider, very much like Andrew Chaikin is. He's a guy who knows what the truth is, but has agreed to perpetuate the lie rather than to reveal what the truth is, for a whole variety of reasons.
Burroughs does a fantastic job of presenting to us exactly the propaganda and the storyline that the powers that be have been selling us as being the truth for decades. And it gives the reader the official historical cover story in brilliant details. He's someone who is most definitely in the know. There are also frames in which some of these lines appear to be behind the moon, where you see the line rising up and being cut off as it hits the lower limb of the moon before re-emerging again on the exact opposite side of that interception point, where it continues on its very straight linear path. And in these cases you can see that the lines do not transit in front of or across the lunar disk, but rather it's the opposite. The moon appears to be transiting and covering these lines. So what's going on here? Why do all these NASA ISS frames of the moon taken from LEO show these parallel lines, and why does this book cover mimic this same visual? What are we seeing, and what is being represented? One hypothesis I've heard has to do with what are called space elevators, which, as the name implies, are elevator transport systems that can be used to lift things, satellites, cargo, spacecraft, people, from the surface of the Earth, lift those up into space. Now, I realize that to many people this idea of building elevators with lengths of the tens of thousands of kilometers that could extend from the Earth's surface up to geostationary orbit or to the moon probably sounds ludicrous, something that, if it is possible at all, must be centuries and centuries beyond what we're capable of doing today. But it really does not seem to be as beyond state-of-the-art as one might think. These are the kind of projects being worked on today and funded today. Back in 1999, NASA sponsored what was called the Space Elevator Workshop, and its purpose was to explore the feasibility of the development of space elevators in the 21st century. And it discusses plans for construction that would take place during the later half of this century. And that's all the unclassified stuff. That is what they're willing to tell us about their capabilities.
Were the Egyptian pharaohs and clergymen of their time aware of subterranean places that had celestial functions? Judging by hieroglyphics that were discovered in tombs of pharaohs, such as Ramses, one can see a collaboration between what the Egyptians described in their time as a stairway to heaven and what we are seeing now with these space elevators emanating from Earth.
The Vector, NASA's official logo. If you've ever looked at NASA's official logo, both their official insignia and their official seal, you'll see that the most prominent object in the seal is a red swooshing object. They call that the chevron or the vector. If you ask NASA's Public Affairs Office, this symbology is featured so heavily in their insignia and seal, they'll give you what really amounts to the standard facile cover story for the unilluminated. They'll tell you that that is a representation of a hypersonic wing design from the 1950s, which was the time the logo was created. Not exactly the case. Someone might want to ask the Russian Federal Space Agency, Roscosmos, that was formed in 1992, why they chose that same logo. And while you're at it, you can go ask the Chinese, who formed their space agency in 1996, why in the world they're using a hypersonic wing design from the 1950s as their official logo. Then you can ask the Japanese, the South Koreans, Taiwanese, Malaysia, Mexico, Iran, all of these countries, even Bulgaria. They all utilize the vector symbology in their space agency logos for their national space agencies. It gets even deeper. You can go look at the individual manned program patches for NASA. The Mercury program, for example, a blatant use of covert symbology. In every logo dealing with the Mercury program, you'll see what looks like a number 7 in their logo. And again, NASA's official story is that they put this number 7 there so that they could pay homage to the original 7 Mercury astronauts. Kind of forgetting the fact that only 6 Mercury astronauts actually flew into space because number 7 never did. Deke Slayton had a heart problem, so he didn't get to go up. So there were only 6 Mercury astronauts. Yet there's a 7 in every single logo. That's in the official mission or official program insignia for Mercury, as well as the 6 individual mission patches carry this logo. And it carries on to the Space Shuttle program. If you look at the Apollo logo has a big letter A in it. At least that's what they want you to believe, but it's not. Again, that's just a simple way of explaining away the inclusion of this vector symbology in the logo. If you go to the Space Shuttle program, the original Space Shuttle STS program patch is a triangular patch that, again, hides the use of the chevronic vector symbology. And that also goes for many of the STS-specific mission patches. Every single one of the International Space Station expedition patches carry the vector symbology. The Russian Mir space station used the vector symbology. That was their official logo. You can even go deeper and look at military-industrial complex companies. Look at the logo on a company like Lockheed Martin, 2 vectors. The X-Prize logo, Ames Research Labs, U.S. Space Command. When you get into the military realm, the United States Space Command, their official logo is the vector symbol. And when you look at the military's individual space-specific programs, all of them deal with vector symbology in their official insignias. And the question really becomes, who or what are these people paying homage to? And the truth, quite frankly, is out of this world.
This painting, entitled The Madonna with Saint Giovannino, was made sometime during the 1400s. The artist's name is not known, but at first glance you can notice a UFO shape in the sky to the right side of the Madonna. If you were to see the original full-size painting, you would see the object clearly. Looking at the enlargement, you can see a man and his dog standing and looking up at the object. However, this painting has something else being depicted. On the left side of the painting, you see the sun and some vector-like objects seemingly flying from or toward the sun. Perhaps this artist was trying to tell us something. In another painting of the Madonna made by a completely different artist, the unusual patterns of the sun and the vector-like symbols have also been added prominently on the Madonna's cloak. You can see the same symbology on this painting as on the one before. This time, however, there is no UFO object to be seen anywhere in the sky. This footage was taken over Mexico City in 2002. There were many other videos and photographs taken of this same type of object, clearly resembling the shapes as seen on the visor of the astronaut, on the moon, and depicted in the 14th century paintings of the Madonna and Child. There is probably a larger story behind the vectors, but it is very unusual this symbology has been adapted by all the United States and foreign space agencies, especially enemies like Iran and others who are also making missions to the moon.